On a stormy night in San Francisco, a little girl just 7 years old stood trembling beneath a flickering street lamp, clutching a battered backpack as rain poured down around her. Her lips quivered, her eyes wide with terror, as if the world had already taken too much from her fragile soul. In that very moment, a man stepped out of his luxury car. Ethan Callahan, a millionaire CEO with everything money could buy, but nothing that could fill the silence of his own heart. He saw her, shivering, broken, yet desperately clinging to hope. When she whispered, "Please, just take me away," something inside him shattered and awoke. This was no coincidence. It was destiny. And from that night on, both their lives would never be the same. Stay with us here at Hidden Echo Stories and subscribe, because this is only the beginning of a story that will touch your heart forever. Ethan Callahan lived in a world built on glass and steel, yet every night he felt like a man trapped inside his own reflection. His penthouse towered over San Francisco, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a city alive with lights, bridges glowing like ribbons, and neon flickers painting the fog. To the outside world, it looked like success. To Ethan, it felt like a cage. The silence of his apartment pressed against him like a weight. The hum of the air conditioner, the faint ticking of a clock, the distant traffic far below, it all sounded like a metronome counting down his solitude. On the coffee table lay a wedding band, pale gold, removed months ago but still leaving its ghost imprinted on his skin. That mark told a story of loss, of promises broken, and of a man who had everything yet felt hollow. He sipped black coffee, so bitter it mirrored the ache inside him, and set it down untouched. His walls displayed framed awards, sleek art pieces, and photographs that belonged to another life. A woman's laughter, a sunset, a fleeting moment of hope. The emptiness was unbearable. Sleep never came easily, only long hours haunted by memories and silence. Past midnight, unable to face the quiet any longer, Ethan grabbed his coat and stepped into the storm. Rain lashed against the glass doors of the lobby. The doorman barely stirred as Ethan walked out into the chaos of the night. Driving through the city, his luxury car felt less like a machine of power and more like a ghost ship cutting through rivers of neon and rain. He passed familiar landmarks, a bookstore he never entered, a park he once crossed but never stopped in. They looked unreal, blurred behind the downpour. Then it happened. A flicker of motion under a broken street lamp. Something small, fragile, out of place. His heart lurched as he slammed the brakes, tires skidding against the slick pavement. Through the sheets of rain, he saw her. A little girl, barely 7 years old. Barefoot, knees drawn up, clutching a battered backpack against her chest. Her thin jacket clung to her small frame, soaked through, hair plastered across her pale face. For an instant he thought she was an apparition conjured by the storm, a ghost of the city. But then she looked up and their eyes met. Ethan's breath caught. In her gaze was not just fear, it was exhaustion far beyond her years, a desperation so raw it struck him physically. She had seen too much. She was beyond tears. Something inside him cracked. He stepped out into the storm, umbrella forgotten, the cold rain biting against his skin. Each step toward her felt heavy, fragile, as if he might scare her away. Up close she looked even smaller, her lips tinged blue, hands trembling violently as she held her backpack tighter. She shrank back as he knelt, her eyes wide and wary, the kind of eyes that had learned not to trust. "Are you lost? Where's your family?" he asked gently, his voice trembling with something he hadn't felt in years. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she whispered, "No family. Please don't let him find me. Just take me away, please." Those words cut deeper than any contract, any loss he had endured. Ethan felt something inside him break wide open. Logic, risk, consequences, all of it disappeared. He simply knew he could not leave her here. Not tonight. Not ever. Slowly he extended his hand. She stared at it, her hesitation lingering like a fragile thread between them. Finally, with trembling fingers, she reached out. The moment their hands touched, a current surged through him, a vow he did not speak, but one his heart had already made. He guided her toward his car, shielding her from the storm with his body. She moved silently beside him, small and frightened, yet clinging to the fragile lifeline he offered. As the car door closed behind her, Ethan realized the weight of what he had just done. This was not charity. This was not convenience. This was a choice that would alter the course of both their lives. The city blurred around them as he drove, headlights carving through sheets of rain. The girl huddled in the passenger seat, shivering despite the heater blasting warm air. Silence stretched thick between them, punctuated only by the storm hammering the windshield. Ethan's mind raced with questions. Who was she running from? Why had she been alone? Why did her words feel like both a plea and a final goodbye? He glanced at her, saw the way she pressed herself against the seat as if trying to disappear. Her knuckles were raw, an old bruise lingered on her wrist, and her backpack looked more like a shield than a possession. She was fighting to survive, and she was terrified of vanishing completely. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter, his pulse quickening. He was a man of contracts, deadlines, and controlled order. Yet here he was, driving into the unknown with a child who had no one else. And despite the storm outside, a spark flickered within him, a dangerous, unfamiliar thing he had almost forgotten. Purpose. For the first time in years, Ethan Callahan was no longer alone, and neither was she. The diner's neon sign flickered like a fragile heartbeat against the storm, its light cutting through the downpour as Ethan pulled into the parking lot. For a moment, he hesitated, staring at the trembling child beside him. She clutched her backpack so tightly her knuckles turned white, her shoulders rigid, her wide eyes darting toward the glowing windows of the small restaurant. "It's warm inside," Ethan said softly. His voice carried the kind of gentleness he had long forgotten he was capable of. "And you can have something to eat." The girl froze, uncertainty written all over her small face. She glanced at the door as though it were a trap, her fear louder than any thunder outside. Finally, she gave the smallest nod, a fragile surrender. Ethan stepped out first, opening her door and shielding her with his coat as they hurried across the wet pavement. Inside, the diner was a different world. The air was heavy with the scent of coffee and frying bacon, and the harsh storm outside was muffled by the hum of fluorescent lights. A few night wanderers sat scattered at their tables, bent over steaming cups, lost in their own worlds. To Ethan, it felt strange, far from the refined restaurants he was used to, but in this moment it was the most welcoming place in the city. He led the girl to a booth tucked away in the back. She slid into the corner, curling into herself like a shadow trying to disappear. Ethan sat across from her, resisting the urge to pull out his phone or check the time. None of that mattered now. For once, he was exactly where he needed to be. A waitress approached. She was a woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair and eyes that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. She looked at Ethan in his expensive shirt, then at the soaked, trembling child across from him. But instead of questions, she offered only a kind, understanding smile. "What can I get for you two tonight?" "Some hot chocolate," Ethan said after a pause, "and maybe a grilled cheese, something easy." The waitress nodded and returned quickly, setting down not just what he had asked for, but an extra plate with a giant chocolate chip cookie. "She looks like she needs this," she whispered gently before walking away. The girl stared at the steaming mug in front of her, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around the cup. Slowly, the warmth seeped into her skin, and for the first time Ethan saw a trace of life return to her pale cheeks. She took a tentative sip, then another, until the faintest flicker of relief softened her face. Ethan watched, torn between hope and unease. Every small detail drew his attention, the bruise peeking from her sleeve, the way she flinched each time the diner door opened, her eyes constantly scanning the room as though expecting a monster to appear. He had seen fear before in boardrooms and negotiations, but never like this. Never this raw. Finally, her voice broke the silence. Barely above a whisper, she said, "Sophie." Ethan blinked. "Sophie." She nodded once, eyes cast down at the cookie she was nibbling. "That's your name?" he asked softly. Another nod. He repeated it gently, letting the syllables settle in the air. "Sophie, it suits you." The girl glanced up briefly, and for the first time he thought he saw something beyond fear in her gaze, something like the faintest glimmer of trust. As the minutes passed, the tension between them shifted. Ethan found himself leaning forward, not to interrogate her, but to listen. She spoke in fragments, hesitant, her words halting as if each one carried a weight too heavy for someone so small. "He said if I told," her tiny hands clutched the edge of the table, knuckles pale, "he'd hurt me like the others." Her voice cracked, then fell into silence. Ethan's chest tightened. Rage and sorrow warred within him, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "No one's going to hurt you while you're with me, Sophie. I promise." He knew promises were dangerous. He had made them before and failed. But this one was different. This one wasn't about business or love lost. This one was about survival. The waitress returned quietly, setting down the grilled cheese. Sophie took small, careful bites, as if afraid the food would vanish before she could finish. Ethan watched her slowly relax, her shoulders lowering an inch, her breathing evening out. For a fleeting moment, the storm outside seemed to ease, and the air between them grew less heavy. But peace never lasted long. When they left the diner, Sophie pressed close to his side. Her eyes caught on a black van idling across the street, exhaust curling in the rain. She froze, her grip on Ethan's hand tightening painfully. "Don't look," she whispered, terror quivering in her voice. "It's him, Mr. Green's van." Ethan's stomach dropped. His instincts roared to life as he guided Sophie quickly into his car, locking the doors, his pulse hammering in his ears. The headlights from the van glared in the mirror, twin predators watching, waiting. For the first time in years, Ethan felt powerless. Money, connections, influence, none of it mattered here. Back at his penthouse, he led Sophie inside, wrapping her in a blanket as though its warmth alone could shield her from the world. Yet the vast glass walls and marble floors felt less like protection and more like exposure. The storm outside had followed them in. Rick Monroe arrived soon after. Tall, steady, with the calm of a man who had seen more than his share of danger. His presence filled the room, but Sophie recoiled instantly, shrinking back into the couch. "She's scared," Ethan explained quickly, his own voice unsteady as he recounted the night. The rain, the van, Sophie's whispers. Rick's eyes darkened. "You know how many kids go missing in this city every year, and if she recognized that van, this is serious, real serious." For the first time in his carefully constructed life, Ethan felt the full weight of fear. He wasn't negotiating a contract. He wasn't calculating risks. He was standing between a child and the kind of danger that left scars deeper than wealth could ever cover. And in that moment, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He could not walk away. The storm outside raged on, but inside Ethan's penthouse, the true storm was fear. Sophie sat curled beneath a thick blanket, her tiny hands clutching her backpack as though it held her last thread of safety. Her wide eyes darted between Ethan, Rick, and the looming glass windows that revealed the restless city beyond. Rick adjusted the security feeds, his sharp gaze locked on the screens. "The van's still circling," he muttered, his voice grim. "Whoever this Mr. Green is, he's not letting go easily." Ethan's jaw tightened. He stood by the window, staring at the glittering skyline that suddenly felt like a prison. Wealth had always been his armor, contracts, lawyers, a fortress of reputation. But now none of it mattered. Against the darkness Sophie had fled, his millions were worthless. What mattered was the fragile child trembling on his sofa. "Then we fight differently," Ethan said quietly. "We fight for her." Sophie's small voice broke the silence. "He always wore a ring," she whispered, her eyes far away. "A green stone. They called him Mr. Green." The words hung heavy in the air, pressing into Ethan's chest like lead. Rick exhaled, already pulling up databases. That detail might help. If there's a ring, there's a man. If there's a man, we'll find him. But it was more than information. It was a wound carved into Sophie's memory, a reminder of nights too dark for a child to endure. Ethan knelt beside her, his voice softer than it had ever been. "You're safe here, Sophie. No one will hurt you again. I promise." She stared at him, her fragile trust flickering like a candle in the wind. Slowly, cautiously, she gave the smallest nod. Hours bled into uneasy dawn. Ethan tried to distract Sophie with small acts of care. Toast buttered too thickly, scrambled eggs clumsy from years of neglect in the kitchen. Each gesture felt monumental. To her, perhaps, it was proof that kindness still existed. Later that morning, Sophie handed Ethan a crumpled drawing. It showed a small figure trapped in a box, faceless shadows looming above. Her tiny fingers shook as she passed it to him. "That's me," she whispered. Ethan's hands trembled as he held it. This was not just art, it was testimony. He crouched low, looking into her haunted eyes. "You're safe here," he repeated, his voice breaking. "I won't forget, not ever." It was then he realized this was no temporary act of compassion. This was a vow. Determined, Ethan reached out beyond his fortress. He contacted Agent Riley of the FBI's Child Protection Division, laying bare Sophie's story and the threat of the van. Within hours, Riley called back. A license plate hit. A warehouse on the outskirts. A chance. When the raid came, the world felt electric. Ethan, wearing a borrowed vest, stood beside Riley and Rick as tactical teams swarmed the derelict building. Shouts, crashing doors, the blinding flare of flashlights. Chaos unfolded around him. But his focus was only on one door. A locked room, a muffled cry. The bolt cutters snapped through steel, and the door burst open. Inside, a disheveled woman blinked against the harsh light, eyes wide with terror and disbelief. "Please," she gasped, voice raw. "My daughter Sophie, is she alive?" Ethan's throat closed. He stepped forward, voice breaking. "She's safe. She's waiting for you." The woman, Elena, collapsed into his arms, sobbing with the force of years of captivity. Ethan held her steady, whispering the only words that mattered. "You're going home." When mother and daughter reunited, Sophie's cry split the air, a sound of both grief and joy. She flew into Elena's arms, clinging as though she would never let go. "Mommy, you found me." "I never stopped looking," Elena wept. "Never." Ethan stood back, tears burning his eyes. He had thought success was measured in wealth, but in this moment he saw the true meaning of sacrifice, of love, of family. The trial came weeks later. Sophie, fragile but brave, sat in a small courtroom clutching a drawing of her reunited family. Her voice trembled, but it carried through the silence as she spoke of dark rooms and Mr. Green's cruelty. Elena's testimony sealed the truth, and when the judge pronounced life sentences, a ripple of relief swept the room. Outside, Sophie slipped her small hand into Ethan. "Is it over?" she asked. "The worst is over," he promised, his voice steady at last. "You're safe, you're free." And for the first time in years, Ethan Callahan believed his own words. There are moments in life that etch themselves into our hearts forever. For Ethan, it was the night he saw a frightened little girl standing alone in the rain, whispering for someone, anyone, to take her away. For Sophie, it was the night a stranger chose compassion over convenience, courage over indifference. That single moment bound them together, and from it grew a story not of wealth or power, but of love, resilience, and the healing power of trust. Ethan had spent years building walls around himself, convinced that money could shield him from the ache of loneliness. Yet it was Sophie's trembling hand in his that broke those walls apart. She reminded him that the truest victories are not found in boardrooms, but in the quiet promises we make to one another, to protect, to listen, to care. Sophie's journey was not easy. Shadows lingered, nightmares returned, and fear often clung to her like a second skin. But step by fragile step, she began to believe again. Believe that safety was possible, that kindness was real, that she was not alone. With her mother's return and Ethan's unwavering support, Sophie learned that even the darkest nights eventually give way to morning. And Ethan, once a man adrift in silence, discovered the profound weight of responsibility and the even deeper gift of love. He learned that family is not always the one we are born into. It is also the one we choose, the one we fight for, the one we build together in defiance of fear. This story is not just about a girl rescued or a man redeemed. It is about all of us, about the ways we are called every day to notice the trembling hands, the quiet pleas, the souls lost in the storm. It is a reminder that hope can be fragile, but when nurtured, it can transform lives. If this story touched your heart, even for a moment, we invite you to become part of our family here at Hidden Echo Stories. Because every story we share carries a hidden echo of truth. That love is stronger than fear, that healing is possible, and that second chances are real. Stay with us, subscribe to our channel, and let the next story find you, because it might just be the one your heart has been waiting for.